Grace believed in feeding souls before counting profits. For 3 years, she gave a quiet beggar food every evening, never knowing the man she called Daniel would one day wear a suit, stand at the altar, and wait for her. This is the story of how a woman's daily kindness became the test of true love and the shocking wedding that made an entire city gasp. Grace was only 28, but life had already taught her what hunger felt like. Owning a small restaurant in Abuja wasn't easy, but every day she opened her restaurant with the same quiet determination that had carried her from being a waitress who slept in the back room of a canteen to the woman whose food now fed half the neighborhood. Her hands smelled of pepper and smoke most days, but her heart stayed soft. 3 years ago, a man started showing up at the back door of her restaurant. He was always quiet, his clothes torn, face hidden behind a rough beard and layers of dust. The first time he appeared, he had stood by the trash bins as if unsure if he was allowed to be seen. Grace had been cleaning up when she noticed him. He didn't beg or shout. He simply said, "Good evening, sister. Please, anything left?" There was something about the way he spoke, calm, respectful, even in shame, that made her pause. She had handed him a plate of leftover rice and stew. He bowed slightly, whispered, "God bless you, sister," and walked away. From that day, the pattern never broke. Every afternoon, he appeared quietly at her back door. She would hand him a plate, sometimes leftovers, sometimes fresh food if she had enough. He would eat slowly in silence and leave before her staff even noticed. She didn't know his name then, only his gratitude. Later, he told her softly, "My name is Daniel." Grace didn't ask for his story, but from his eyes, she could tell it wasn't a simple one. Sometimes, when business was slow, she would sit on an upturned crate while he ate. They would talk a little, about the weather, about how hard life had become in the city. Once, she asked him what happened to him. He only said, "I lost everything." Then he went silent again, and she never pressed further. Her staff often whispered about him. Some customers even complained. They said his presence at the back made the place look bad. One afternoon, a man eating jollof told her, "Madam Grace, people like that bring bad luck. Chase him away." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and replied quietly, "We all need help sometimes." Then she continued serving food as if nothing had been said. The truth was, her restaurant barely made enough profit. Some nights, she went home with less than she'd hoped. But no matter how tight things got, she never skipped feeding Daniel. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper. Maybe she saw her old self in him, the girl who once had to beg for leftover bread from her boss's kitchen. Over time, Daniel became a silent part of her life. She didn't even have to look at the clock anymore. When evening came, her heart would already expect him. If he came a few minutes late, she'd start worrying. Sometimes she would package his food early and keep it aside before closing sales. He was always polite, always thankful, and never took more than she offered. After every meal, he'd say, "God bless you, sister," and leave as quietly as he came. People around her didn't understand it. But for Grace, feeding him wasn't just charity. It was a reminder that success means nothing if you forget where you came from. And so, the days turned into months, and months into years. The woman who once needed help now gave it freely. The beggar who had lost everything found one constant kindness waiting behind a restaurant kitchen door. Neither of them knew that their simple evening routine, an act so ordinary it went unnoticed by the world, was quietly shaping both their destinies. By the time 3 years had passed, Grace's life had found a quiet rhythm, long hours at the restaurant, laughter with her workers, and Daniel's soft, "God bless you," each evening. But life doesn't stay still forever. 6 months before her 30th birthday, she met David. A mutual friend introduced them at a small get-together. He was the kind of man you notice because he doesn't try to be noticed. Calm eyes, easy smile, the quiet confidence of someone who has learned from struggle. He said he ran a small import business. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep things going. They began to talk more, and within weeks they were inseparable. Their outings were simple: a plate of suya shared at a roadside stand, a walk around Millennium Park, Sunday evenings by Jobby Lake watching the city lights. David never showered her with gifts or grand words. What he gave was time. Sometimes he would show up at her restaurant unannounced, roll up his sleeves, and help her serve food when it got busy. The workers teased him. He laughed it off. Even her customers liked him. He treated everyone the same way, with quiet respect. Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years: rest. Around him, she didn't have to prove she was strong or capable. He seemed to understand the kind of woman who built her own life from the ground up. He once told her, "I like how you don't hide your hustle. Most people pretend to be what they're not." She smiled and said, "I've been hungry before. Pretending doesn't fill stomachs." Their bond grew naturally. He met her siblings, helped her mother fix a leaking tap, and became part of her daily life without forcing it. It was the kind of love that came softly, not loud or dramatic, but steady. 6 months after they met, David proposed. It happened on a quiet evening after closing time. He knelt there holding a modest ring, the smell of fried plantain still in the air. "Grace," he said, "you have a way of making people feel full, even before they eat. Will you marry me?" Her answer came with tears and laughter mixed together. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." They planned a small wedding, something she could afford, nothing extravagant, just family and close friends. Her staff clapped and danced when she told them. Even her regular customers smiled proudly, saying, "Madam, you deserve this happiness." That evening, when Daniel came for his meal, Grace shared the news with him too. The beggar smiled faintly, looked at her for a long moment, and said, "I hope he deserves you, sister." His tone carried a sadness she didn't understand, but she only laughed and told him to pray for her. As the weeks passed, Grace began to notice a few small things about David. He rarely spoke about his family. When she asked, he simply said they weren't close and she'd meet them at the wedding. He never invited her to his home. Every meeting happened in public, restaurants, parks, her own place. Her friends called it strange. "Grace, you sure he's not hiding something?" one asked. Grace shook her head and laughed. "Not everyone lives open like we do. He'll come around," she said. She wanted to believe it. David had given her no reason not to. Still, a quiet question stayed in her heart, one she brushed aside each time she saw his gentle smile. Work, planning, and love filled her days. And through it all, she still kept Daniel's evening plate ready at the back door. That small act had become part of who she was. Her life, in its own simple way, felt complete, grounded in hard work, kindness, and a love she thought was finally hers to keep. She didn't know that both men who shaped her evenings, one who ate in silence and one who loved in simplicity, were about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. 2 weeks before the wedding, the back door stayed quiet. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel didn't show up. At first, Grace thought maybe he was sick. She packed his usual portion of rice and beans, left it covered near the sink, and waited. But the alley stayed empty. The following evening, she waited again. Still nothing. By the third day, she started to worry. She asked the water vendor who usually passed by the restaurant if he'd seen the beggar who used to sit by the back fence. He shook his head. The fruit seller next door said she hadn't seen him either. It was as if Daniel had vanished completely. The thought bothered her more than she expected. Feeding him had become part of her daily life. Now that he was gone, the evenings felt incomplete, a small silence she couldn't explain. But she had no time to dwell on it. The wedding was just around the corner, and the preparations were piling up. Tailors, guest lists, catering, everything needed attention. Her days ran longer than usual, her nights shorter. Still, between all the excitement, her mind often drifted to the missing man. Then, without warning, something shifted with David. He began to change, not in how he treated her, but in what he revealed. One afternoon, he came to her shop driving a sleek black SUV she had never seen before. She laughed at first, thinking it was borrowed. But when he said it was his, her laughter froze halfway. He smiled softly and said, "I've been meaning to tell you the truth about me." Grace frowned. "What truth?" David leaned forward, eyes calm. "I didn't want to say anything before because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have. I'm not just a small importer. I have other businesses. I only kept them quiet until I was sure of you." The words felt strange on her ears. Just last week, he'd been talking about struggling with taxes. Now, he spoke like a man with more money than he let on. Before she could process it, he surprised her again. He said he was moving the wedding to a luxury venue in the city, all paid for. "It's a gift to you," he said. "You deserve more than a small hall." Her friends were stunned. The simple wedding they'd planned suddenly became a high-end event. Everything changed overnight. The venue, the decoration, even the guest list. Some of her friends pulled her aside one day and whispered, "Grace, be careful. Something doesn't add up." But she wanted to believe the best. Maybe he had just been testing her sincerity. Maybe this was his way of showing he trusted her now. Yet, a part of her couldn't ignore the unease. The same man who used to sit with her at roadside joints now wore designer shoes and spoke with new confidence. His calls became fewer. He said he was busy with final preparations and family matters. When she asked about meeting his people, he said calmly, "You'll meet them at the wedding." The night before the ceremony, she called to ask if they could see each other. He laughed softly and said, "It's better we don't. Tradition says the groom shouldn't see the bride before the wedding day." It sounded reasonable, but something about the tone left her restless. That night, Grace sat on her bed, staring at the old apron she used to wear when Daniel came by. She remembered his soft thank yous, his quiet presence, his tired but kind eyes. And she wondered, for reasons she couldn't explain, why she missed a man who was supposed to be a stranger. Outside, Abuja moved on as usual, cars honking, streetlights blinking, life happening. But inside Grace's chest, something was shifting. The beggar who had vanished and the man she was about to marry felt connected in a way she couldn't yet understand. The morning of the wedding came bright and calm. Grace woke up early, her stomach tight with both excitement and unease. The luxury venue David had arranged looked like something out of a dream. Tall chandeliers, white flowers, music humming softly from hidden speakers. It was far beyond anything she had imagined for herself. Her friends fussed around her, helping her with makeup and jewelry. She smiled when they called her Mrs. David-to-be, but her heart wasn't completely settled. She kept thinking about how fast everything had changed, from a simple restaurant owner's small dream wedding to this grand affair filled with unfamiliar faces. When the guests began to arrive, Grace noticed something strange. The groom's side was filled with elegantly dressed people. Their cars lined the street outside, their manner calm and confident. People whispered that they looked like top businessmen, even government officials. Grace looked around, confused. David had said he wasn't close to his family. Yet here they were, dozens of them, gathered like royalty. Her father took her arm when it was time. The music started. As they began the slow walk down the aisle, her veil clouded her vision, but she could see the groom standing tall at the altar. He had his back turned, speaking to the pastor. Grace's hands trembled slightly. She tried to breathe. Every step felt heavier than the last. The guests rose to their feet, the hall filled with light and perfume and whispers. Somewhere in the crowd, flashes from cameras blinked like tiny stars. When she finally reached the altar, the groom turned around. It was David, same smile, same eyes, but something felt off. The look in his face wasn't nervous or shy as before. It was calm, certain. Then, just as the pastor prepared to start the vows, David raised his hand gently. "Before we continue," he said, his voice steady, "I need to tell you the truth." The hall fell silent. He turned to Grace and said softly, "I owe you my honesty. I haven't been completely who you think I am." A confused murmur spread among the guests. Grace blinked, unsure of what was happening. David's expression shifted. He no longer smiled the way he used to. He dropped his shoulders, let his back hunch slightly, and lowered his eyes. That same quiet, almost apologetic look she had seen so many times behind her restaurant. Then, in that voice, that broken, raspy tone, he said, "Thank you, sister, for the food." The words struck her like lightning. Her lips parted, breath trembling. Her breath caught. "Daniel," she whispered. A gasp rippled through the hall. David, or rather, the man she thought she knew, nodded slowly. "Yes, Grace. My name is not David. My name is Jonathan." The sound of murmurs filled the air, sharp and confused. Grace stumbled back a step, gripping her father's arm. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Daniel? The beggar? You?" Jonathan looked at her with steady eyes. 3 years ago, I came to your restaurant every evening. You fed me without knowing who I was. You never turned me away. I was the man sitting by your back door." Grace's knees felt weak. "No, that's not possible." "It's true," he said quietly. "After I was betrayed by someone I loved, someone who only wanted my money, I walked away from everything. I needed to see if kindness still existed. I disguised myself as a beggar to find out." Every word hit her like a stone. The man she had pitied, fed, and spoken to in passing. The man who vanished. was standing in front of her as her groom. Guests covered their mouths. Some whispered. Others stared in disbelief. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She looked at him, trembling. You mean all this time? I was feeding you, and you were testing me? Jonathan swallowed hard. No, I was trying to heal. You just showed me something real again. But his voice, calm as it was, couldn't ease the storm in her chest. Her wedding day had turned into something she didn't recognize. Half miracle, half betrayal. The man she loved and the beggar she pitied were one and the same. And now, in front of everyone, she didn't know which of them she was truly marrying. The hall was still silent when Grace finally found her voice fully. You lied to me, she said, her voice breaking. Every single day, you lied to me. Jonathan took a shaky breath. I did, he admitted, his eyes glistening. And I'll carry that shame forever. But please, let me give you the details. He turned slightly toward the guests, who sat frozen, unsure whether to stay or leave. Cameras lowered. Phones went still. He faced her again. 3 years ago, I lost everything. Not my money, but my faith in people. Someone I loved only saw my wealth. When she left, I walked away from that world. I disguised myself as a beggar to see if kindness still existed. I spent months on the streets. I watched people walk past, mock me, ignore me. You were the only one who stopped. Every day, you fed me, not for show, not for reward, just because you cared. Grace stood still, her tears falling fast now. So I was a test? A project? No, he said quickly, shaking his head. You were the only real thing I found in years of pretending. I became David, so I could come close without the disguise. I wanted to know if your heart was still the same when you didn't see me as a beggar. Her body trembled. You made me fall in love with a stranger. You made me feed a lie. He stepped forward slightly, his voice low. I made a mistake trying to protect myself from pain. But every moment with you, every laugh, every shared plate of food, every word, was real to me. Grace's father moved closer, whispering for her to calm down, but she couldn't. Do you know what it feels like to stand here in front of everyone and realize you were part of someone's experiment? She cried. You made me feel sorry for you. You made me believe you were someone you weren't. Jonathan opened a small folder from his pocket. This isn't to prove I'm right, he said quietly, but to show you the truth. He pulled out photographs, pictures of her giving him food over the years, her smile at the back door, the quiet moments no one else had noticed. I didn't record you to embarrass you, he said. I kept these to remind myself that good people still exist. You gave me faith again. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests murmured about forgiveness. Others shook their heads. Both families whispered behind her, urging her to continue the ceremony. He's proven his love, someone said. He did it all for you. Grace couldn't even look at them. Her chest rose and fell, her breath uneven. Every word, every whisper felt like pressure closing in. She turned back to Jonathan. You could have just told me who you were. You didn't need to hide. I wanted to be sure, he said. I didn't want another woman who saw money first. I wanted someone who saw me. Her anger gave way to exhaustion. She looked down at her trembling hands. For a long, quiet moment, she said nothing. Around them, the crowd waited. Finally, her voice came softly. When you sat behind my restaurant eating rice with your hands, when you said God bless you, and walked away, were those feelings real? Or was that part of your act too? Jonathan's face crumpled. His voice broke. Those moments were the most real thing I've ever known, he said. I look forward to seeing you every night. You didn't feed a beggar, Grace. You fed a broken man who was trying to find himself again. The hall stayed silent. Grace removed her veil slowly from her head. Her face was wet but calm. She looked at him directly. I fed a hungry man, she said softly. I didn't fall in love with his hunger or his wealth. I loved his honesty, the one thing you didn't give me. He nodded, tears falling freely now. You're right. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it if you let me. She took a slow breath, then turned toward the pastor. There will be no wedding today, she said quietly. We'll start over, if we start at all. Gasps filled the room again. Jonathan lowered his head, then nodded. I'll wait, he said. 6 months later, the city buzzed with life as it always did. Grace's restaurant was fuller than ever. Behind the counter, she moved with her usual focus, apron tied tight, sweat on her brow, laughter in her voice. Beside her, Jonathan, now clean-shaven, dressed simply, helped her serve plates of rice to the waiting customers. No cameras, no secrets, no disguise. As evening lights spilled through the doorway, he looked at her with quiet gratitude. She looked back, smiling faintly. "If you're done stirring that pot," she teased, "you can start washing the plates." He laughed softly. "Yes, ma'am." Their eyes met. No wealth, no disguise, no test. Just two people who had finally chosen truth over fear. And this time, the love was real.